Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening for our meeting. And thank you to all who are streaming, who are attending as well. I appreciate your presence. Let us pray. It's like deja vu, little Sir Echo. O Lord, giver of life and source of our freedom, we are reminded by the psalmist that yours is the earth in its fullness, the world and those who dwell in it. We know that it is from your hand that we have received all we have and are and will be. Gracious and loving God, we understand that you call us to be stewards of your abundance, the caretakers of all you have entrusted to us. Help us always to use your gifts wisely and teach us to share them generously. May our faithful stewardship bear witness to the love of Christ in our lives. We pray with grateful hearts in Jesus' name, amen. Again, thank you everyone for coming, being here and streaming. And now I'd like to welcome Catherine.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Catherine Torgiano. If you don't know me, I am the chairperson of our parish council. And again, I just wanted to welcome you all. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be here, to listen and learn about some tough information we've got to share, and to hopefully help us move forward in a positive way and continue to make St. Catherine's the wonderfully welcoming and wonderful place that it is. Before we get started, I'm going to ask members of the Parish Council and Finance Ministry to stand up and just introduce themselves quickly so you kind of know who's who.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Catherine. As you now know, I'm John Hurley, if you haven't already recognized me. Again, I'd like to echo Catherine and thank everyone who's made a special effort to attend the meeting tonight. I especially want to thank Bob Goldbach, Karen Luke, Pam McInerney, and Jeff Beckett for helping arrange this space and the live stream for us. At this point, I'd like to take a few minutes to review the purpose for gathering tonight. In early January, Dan, our new finance director, Bob Goldbach, Rob, and I looked at post-Christmas revenue and expenses and were concerned about a potential cash shortfall in the spring. We determined that an emergency meeting of the Finance Ministry was warranted, and so on January 16th, the Finance Ministry met. After Dan presented the information, the Finance Ministry felt that the situation was so serious that it warranted a parish meeting, one held outside of the regular mass setting as we had been doing for the last few years. With that decision made, we felt that it was very important that members of the parish council be made aware of the situation and be a part of the planning for this parish meeting. The Finance Ministry and Parish Council met on January 31st to discuss the situation and to plan for the meeting that's being held tonight. I think simply the fact that we have moved this quickly should be a signal that this is a really important event. The purpose of the meeting tonight is twofold. The first is to inform, to briefly present information about what brought us to this point, to describe the current situation and the outlook, for the next several months, and to answer questions as fully and honestly as we can. The second is to plan. Use the knowledge gained from the information presented to create the next steps to address both short-term and long-term solutions so that we can move forward together to create the next chapter of the St. Catherine of Siena story. Please understand that this is not meant to be a detailed problem-solving meeting. There will be plenty of time for creative problem-solving once we are all working from the same base of information. We are not discussing issues of faith or liturgy or fault. The challenges we confront are we issues, not solely Rob or staff issues. So what brought us to this point? This is not necessary to say, but for those who love to look for conspiracies behind events, I can assure you that there is not a connection between former finance director Maureen leaving and Dan suddenly discovering that we have a serious financial problem. Maureen and I frequently spoke about the need to reassess our status after Christmas. More to the point, were it not for the work that Maureen did, it would have taken Dan significantly longer to wrap his arms around the current state. As Dan will describe it, during the last 3 years, we have experienced a perfect storm of bankruptcy, pandemic, clustering, and changing demographics. The finance ministry has worked hard for the last 5 years, even through the pandemic, to keep you informed of our financial situation. And so some of what we report should not be new nor surprising. Since 2020, we have been able to avoid taking potentially painful actions on 2 occasions. Before the onset of COVID, the finance ministry was seriously discussing the need for cuts to the budget, including staff. We were saved because before we had to take any dramatic actions, Camilla and Jamie announced that they were leaving the parish and returning to Arizona. A bullet dodged. Secondly, during COVID, we applied for and received funds through the Payroll Protection Plan, otherwise known as the PPP. While it was certainly a blessing at the time, allowing us to retain staff and meet our obligations, the PPP also masked what was really happening in terms of collections and overall revenue. And for those interested, our PPP loan was forgiven, and so we have no obligation in that regard. Dan will speak of this in more detail, but we have experienced a 10-year trend of declining collections. Compared to fiscal year 2013, our projected results for fiscal year 2023 revenue will be down $179,000, 23 compared to 13. Yet our expenses have only decreased $103,000, leaving a gap of $76,000. There are many reasons for this, and we've all talked about them. But in the end, without change, the path forward is clearly not sustainable. Finally, St. Catherine's has due two buckets, for lack of a better word, of money that are invested and managed by Alesco advisors through the diocese. The money in the capital fund is designated for, but not legally restricted to, use to repair and replace major items in the church and on the campus, the roof, parking lot, carpeting, painting, HVAC, all those kinds of things. The amount in that fund currently is approximately $176,000. The second, the money in our savings account, is more liquid and has been used to fund occasional cash flow gaps as well as to cover our CMA shortages. This account has provided an important safety net when revenue has fallen short or a major non-capital expense needs to be paid, like the school assessment, the quarterly pension contributions, etc. The amount in both the capital and the savings account changes depending on market forces, but the current value of the savings account is approximately $200,000, a little bit more. We will discuss the following in more detail following Dan's presentation. But in order to put everything in context, I felt that it was really important for you to know that we have received very preliminary, and I can't state that strongly enough, very preliminary notice from the diocese that the St. Catherine's assessment as a part of the diocesan bankruptcy settlement will likely be around $200,000. This means that essentially our savings safety net will be gone, thus creating the current sense of urgency. Final decisions and assessments are expected to be announced by the summer. Again, at this point, everything is tentative. The only thing that's certain is that there will be a sizable assessment. We have set aside the first 20 minutes at the start of the discussion period to focus on questions and comments about the bankruptcy settlement. At this time, I would like to turn things over to Dan. And again, that we ask that you jot down any questions you have, and we will address them after Dan's presentation.
Hello? You hear me okay? Well, good evening, everybody. And I wish I was meeting some of you under different circumstances, but here we are. But I do want to welcome folks I do want to thank folks for welcoming me, and I have got to work with some of you already, and I look forward to getting to know the rest of you. So I'm going to start with this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. That's my favorite verse. That's what I'm going to stick to throughout this process, throughout life, and I just encourage us to do the same. So, without a significant increase in revenue, or a significant decrease in cost, or a combination of the two, potentially we could be out of cash within a 6 month, out of unrestricted cash assets within a 6-month period. And regardless of the settlement, I mean, we'd still be having this meeting. As John talked about, there's a lot of factors that went into this, but the settlement just makes it that much more urgent. And again, how do we get here? Well, the pandemic, that's the biggest factor. You can see it just when you come to church. Everything was closed down. When it did open back up, we just haven't reached pre-pandemic levels. But throw into that all the other factors, and that's how we got here. The rise in expenses, we'll see that in the numbers in a moment. But I want to say this. Think about the fact that we were essentially closed for a good period of time, and then we opened back up. So the rise in expenses is not over 10 years. It dipped, and then it's just coming back up. Of course, the PPP loan was very helpful in a number of ways, but it also, prolonged this conversation. So this is just a chart of the last 10 years. The blue line is regular collections. The red line is overall revenue. They essentially follow each other. The collections make up over 90% of our overall revenue. The balance is program fees. Certain gifts and donations are classified differently, but most of that's program fees, rental income, things like that. The green line is our expenses, and you can see for the most part they've tracked very well. Testament to Rob and the staff have managed it very well over the years. There was a few differences here. And that's normal, right? Sometimes you end the year with a surplus, sometimes you end with a deficit, but over time you should be balanced. But last year we had just a slight deficit, but we're projected this year to be quite a bit higher. And then hopefully you can see those numbers all the way in the back there. But this is the chart. You can see here, total operating revenue, right? 777, 782, 783, 780, and then it begins to go down a little bit. 772, 714. It jumps in 18 and 19 by quite a bit. 790. But then the pandemic comes into play. 742, 654, 622, and projected this year of just around 600,000. So this is a different model based on the next 6 months, and we started this a month ago. So January's already happened, but the actual numbers are pretty close. So that's still pretty accurate. I've highlighted a few. This is on average. If we said 44,000 a month in regular collections, that would put us at 566 for the year versus 564 versus last year. Now, the reason I went a little bit higher there is because in the first half of this year, we actually did bring in more money than we did the first half of last year. And when it comes to the expenses, we're going to look at every expense. Where there's opportunities to save money, we will be. Getting a new copier, our copier lease is coming up due. We can get a more affordable copier lease, for example. So we'll look at all those, but also keep in mind that expenses are rising, including our Genie bills and the facilities. A lot of these things are hard to control, but we will look for that low-hanging fruit for sure. But I highlighted the top line, because as you'll see in a moment, that's the majority of our cost. We don't want to have to get to that point where we make changes or cuts to the staff, but that could be a reality. And then you'll notice each quarter, every 3 months, there's a a big deficit. That's normal because every 3 months we make payments to the diocese. Our school assessment every quarter is $23,250. So what's that? Just under $100,000 a year to the diocese for the school assessment. Insurance every quarter. There's a couple other quarterly payments that are spread out in this model, but that's why you see that big drop there. And again, operating surpluses and deficits are normal month to month, so those do average out. But in this model, again, we're at about a roughly $77,000 deficit by the end of this fiscal year, which fiscal year ends June 30th. We go July to June. So when we talk about the remainder of this year, we're really talking about 4.5 more months. And this bottom line is consolidated several of our accounts to just show you what our total unrestricted assets are. And that includes our operating account, a little bit of money in a savings account, and then our stable patrimony, or it's one of the communis funds that John referenced. So the settlement, well, we're still waiting to hear more about that. As of right now, we're anticipating that we have to make that payment June 1st. So if that were to be the case, and then let's say there's a shortfall in the CMA, for example, and in this model I've got it at 20,000, it'll be less than that. It's probably going to be no more. I mean, I think we're closing in. We're down to maybe a $15,000 gap right about now, which is good. But still, we could be potentially out of unrestricted cash June or earlier. So this is a pie chart. I took last fiscal year's numbers, just so we had a full year. But you can see 60% it goes towards salaries and benefits. That's 3 full-time, 4 part-time, FICA, health insurance, pension. That also includes our part-time employees, part-time contractual employees and things like that. So that's our biggest cost. The next is the school assessment. That's 15%. Building is 6%. That includes everything from the RG&E bills, lawn and salt maintenance, boiler, just general maintenance and supplies. 2% is the Catholic Courier. 4% is everything. It's the other, everything from the copier to flowers and candles and computers and things like that. 3% for supplies, and it's kind of a weird description because that includes telephones and postage and printing, office supplies, books, Lenten books and things like that, and internet. Now, what I do want to say here, right? This is by nature and not function. Here's what I mean by that. When you give to United Way, they say, well, 92 cents of every dollar you give goes directly to programming. They're talking about that from a functional perspective. If we were to do that same calculation, this 2% for ministries, it'd be way higher than that, right? Because what you would do is you would take salaries of all the program folks, Father Rob, Karen, Sister Ruth, probably a portion of all those things would be allocated to programs. So I don't want you to be alarmed by that number. That's just the way our accounting system is set up. But it also, it's two different perspectives. But rest assured, our program and ministry costs is certainly higher than 2%. So going forward, I think we really need to have a two-pronged approach. What's our short-term approach? And Laura gave a great example. the movie Apollo 13, right? The idea was, get these guys around the moon and get them home. That was their goal. And then after that, we can reevaluate the NASA program. And that's kind of, think of that as what we're doing here. Our short term is, let's just get home. Let's just get through this fiscal year. Let's get through the settlement. So we have to come up with some short-term solutions. And we believe the first thing is just open and honest communication and transparency. And you know, hey, listen, if we, this might be, in some ways, at least this severity, this is new territory. So let's start with just having a meeting like this and talking about it. And finding out really what is everyone's interest and commitment, and there's a lot of faces that haven't returned, right? So let's talk about how do we re-engage folks, in answering, educating. What does giving go to, right? And we understand that's there's the, if you will, the moral obligation to giving to a church, the tithing, that aspect of it, but even me, when I give to the church, I want to know that my money, what it's going to, and we get that, and so, hopefully more and more, you're going to see even more about what we do and what the money is going to, and if you have questions, I'm always open to discussing that. I threw this figure up. This is just an example as a benchmark, because we can say, well, if every active family or if every registered family gave X percent or this or that. But if we just said, okay, if 300 families gave $250, for example, that's $75,000. Another short-term solution is using a portion of the restricted facility fund. We don't want to do that, but come time to make the bankruptcy payment, that may be an option we have to consider. Not taking all of it, hopefully, but maybe at least some of it to make that payment. And then, of course, we talked about this, reducing costs, all line items. We're going to look at all that stuff. But the reality is, and all these little changes that we can make, especially in the short term, are not going to amount to a great deal. Even if we made cuts to the excuse me. Even if we made cuts to the staff in the short term, it wouldn't do a great deal. That would be more going into next year. And in the long term, excuse me, how do we sustain beyond this fiscal year? So we'll be putting together task force, steering committee, whatever you want to call it, and really revisiting things like mission and vision and goals. And let me just go to this next. I'll come back to that process. But all terms, we want to say this, that we don't want to preach to the choir, right? And this isn't about guilting anybody. And for all the folks that are here and watching online that give, thank you. Right? Thank you. For those of you that, maybe you're not in a position to, we get it, right? We're not here to make people feel guilty. We want to be honest about where we're at, and if there are folks that aren't giving, talk to us about why, right? And if you are part of the community, well, let's have a conversation about that. When we talk about the long term too, yes, we're going to continue to manage it well, and we're going to continue to be transparent. And there are certain constants, right? We're going to have Mass, we're always going to have Eucharist, the sacraments, but then we look at the other things, programs, if you will, and what are the things that we can do to engage everybody, and make, bring people in and bring people back, if you will. So it's just a little visual for the timeline and the process. We had our trustee meeting back in, January. Then we met with the full finance council. It was a couple weeks later. Then a week later, we met with the parish council and the finance council. That was 2 weeks ago. And here's where we are now, the town hall meeting, parish hall meeting. And so I would say within a week or two, I think we'd like to establish, our, our steering committee or our task force. That's probably, I imagine, going to be folks from finance, from parish, Father Rob, myself, maybe some staff members. And, we're going to do strategic planning, but in a very condensed fashion, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you have done strategic planning, and that can take 6 months to a year. It takes a while. We're going to come, and I'm going to come, in consultation with Father Rob, to this committee with some real concrete ideas and proposals, so that they've got something to start with. And, whether we have 2 committees maybe or one, we work on these short terms and then we work on the long-term solutions. And I think as we have those conversations too, I mean, part of the conversation will be with our sister church up the road too. I mean, we can't have the conversation without having more conversation about, where are we at in the clustering process and what's that going to look like a year from now, 2 years or 5 years. So that's the process, coming up with some quick short-term solutions and then looking to the future.
Thank you, Dan. Lots of numbers. We tried to find a balance between presenting a realistic picture, but without completely overwhelming folks with the minutia of balance sheets and financial statements. Hopefully, the picture that Dan has painted for us is one that is clear, and certainly we're open to answering any of your questions. And that's the point that we're at now, is to open for discussion. In order to keep some sense of order and to make sure that everyone is heard, we're asking that you please limit your questions or comments to a minute-ish. And if someone has already said something that's very similar to what you want to share, you're welcome to say it, but for the sake of giving everyone a chance, we would ask that you might not repeat what's already been said. We have 4 wireless mics, and I don't know that we recruited 4 people to hold them. Okay, we do. Good deal. We would ask you to use the mics when you're asking a question so that everyone here, as well as the people at watching on the live stream, can hear. Likewise, we would ask that you just raise your hand when you want to speak. We'll try to do the best that we can to capture folks in the approximate order that you raise your hand. Importantly, if you're joining us online, please use the chat function to ask your question, and we will make sure that your question is asked. As mentioned earlier, the first 20 minutes of the discussion period will be focused on the proverbial we didn't coordinate very well. Elephant in the room, the assessment related to the bankruptcy settlement. And it's one of the reasons why we didn't want to start a conversation about that until Dan had had a chance to present the bigger picture for us. Please remember that the settlement is still being negotiated and that the information on the amount that each parish will be assessed is preliminary and only an estimate. More importantly, and I need to thank Yvonne Limbeck for raising this point during the joint meeting, that the money that we will be asked to contribute to the settlement is not going to the diocese. It's going to victims of abuse that was in so many cases ignored by diocesan leadership for decades. As a parish community, we have a legacy of compassion and generosity when confronted by tragedy impacting our sisters and brothers. This is another case of where we have been called. So, the other point that I think is also worth remembering is that those of us who have been parishioners at St. Catherine's, we got lucky. There's never been evidence that any of the priests who served us were in any way implicated in the abuse scandals that have come to light. We had no control over who was assigned to this parish. And almost in a similar way, we have no control over the assessment. We got lucky. Just think about those parishes where that was not the case. So, with that, we will take 20 minutes. We're on the clock. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it's important for everyone here to have an opportunity to share their thoughts. At the same time, the really critical work for us is to address the presentation that Dan made, which is that regardless of what happens with the settlement, we have some serious issues in front of us as a parish community that we need to confront, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to take a lot of work. And this is a parish that has shown that when confronted with adversity, we step up in a very creative way, and that's where we really need to focus a lot of our energy tonight.
There are 3 questions that have already come in via live stream, 2 in regards to our church and 1 in regards to the elephant. Which one should I start with?
Let's stay with the elephant.
Okay, the elephant. Can you explain a little more about why we have to pay into the settlement, and do we know how they are determining each parish's assessment?
I think so part 1, why are we paying into it? My understanding of it is the amount was just simply so much that the diocese couldn't cover it all on their own. And it was passed out to the parish, if you will. Is that your understanding, Rob? Is that?
I think that is part of it. But I also think the shared responsibility. And I know Yvonne is here tonight, and I tried this morning at another finance meeting down the road to share her thoughts too. I know originally we heard parishes were not going to be included, but nonetheless we are. And I think I think John and Dan done a good job. And Yvonne, if you'd like to jump in, I don't know, where are you, Yvonne? I'll be right behind me? Okay, yes. You know, we might not be happy about it, but we have to remember, too, these people who have been abused need to have justice in their lives. And I think we all have to remember, too, they could be sitting in our pews. You may not know them, but many of us do, and many of you possibly, and other parishioners, have members of your family or friends who've been abused. And so we're here to seek healing as best we can. Money doesn't solve everything, but justice for them as well. And I think we need to think about that and remember that. I've said many times in different homilies, why people come together as a community is because they rely on our prayer among one another. We do not know what's happening in everybody's lives day to day necessarily, but they're here for our support and our prayer and our faith, and to build their faith. It certainly is not a time to alienate broken individuals when we're trying to welcome people, we always say that, welcome into our faith communities, and then to speak harshly about why is this our responsibility in hurting them and actually showing them right out the door. I mean, that's my thought. Yvonne, do you want to add anything? I don't put you on the spot.
When I was at the parish council meeting and just sitting and listening and prayerfully thinking about it after driving over and the first reaction is to be angry about having to participate in that bailout or whatever it feels like, right? We all have those feelings. And I just tried to pray and think about it a different way, and that's all it really was.
Yeah, I think part of it too is if we said, well, shouldn't only the parishes where this happened pay? As John mentioned, this happened decades ago. Those folks that did this, they're not there anymore. They're not around anymore. And we were fortunate and blessed that it didn't happen here, right? But we're all part of the bigger church, and maybe that's not a satisfying answer, but that's part of us sharing in each other's burdens and respond, in each other's burdens. Now, as far as how they came up with it, it was, so they took the total figure. The majority of that is being paid by the diocese. There's a portion of that they said the parishes are going to have to contribute. And they looked at 4 different areas: number of households, our CMA goal, collections, 21-22 collections, and unrestricted assets as of 6/30/22. In each of those categories, they took each individual parish's share compared to the whole diocese. So, for example, let's use easy math here. If let's just say there's 100 households here at St. Catherine's, and there's 1,000 households in the diocese. So we're 10%. So of that overall portion, 1/4 of it, we would pay 10% of that. And they did that in all 4 areas.
I would like to ask about the insurance that the diocese have on such situations. And I've seen a couple videos of the bishop saying the individual members of the parish or the parishes do not have to contribute to this lawsuit. He said that a couple times. And then it was said that we do. So what happened? can't we take the bishop's word? And I'd like to see, we are not against helping these people. They are victims. But the church caused this for decades. And they just move these people around. This is unjust to put it on the people that have built up the church in our diocese. And I want to know, more help needs to come down from the top. What more can the diocese do to straighten this out? I mean, we have one problem trying to get our church back on its feet financially, and we will do that. But all of a sudden they come up telling us we could owe $200,000 more out of the blue. Now, there are things that the diocese could do. They own a lot of land. What about that huge complex up on Buffalo Road that they maintain? Couldn't some of those things be sold? I mean, why do we have to do all the sacrificing when we weren't part of the problem? A horrible, immoral sin was committed, but are they committing another sin of injustice towards us? Don't get me wrong, these people should be paid. But I'm saying this is unjust.
Dan, if I could just speak to that for just a second. Having attended the first meeting when the diocese announced the path forward on the bankruptcy, it wasn't. I'm in an uncomfortable position of seeming to defend the bishop, but the advice that his attorneys, the diocesan attorneys, gave was that given the situation at the time, the parishes would not be involved in contributing to a settlement. I think I can say with some degree of certainty that everyone in that room doubted that that was going to be the case when everything was settled. But at the time, it was a statement I'm sure that whoever that attorney was would love to take back. And it's hard to argue with anything you said.
John, can I say this at our last meeting, and I think we can do this at some point if we have to have another meeting, and ask a representative ask somebody from the diocese to come out and answer these questions. They're great questions, I'm pretty sure they'd be willing to do that, and have them speak a little bit more about it. But understandable.
Pam had asked me before I answered. Cut the line.
No. I just want to make an observation, and it has to do with finances in general. When John and I first joined this parish, we walked in and welcomed, and we had belonged to a parish that isn't too far away, that we never were treated that well there. We were considered part of the family. This parish is a family, still is. But like all families, we haven't had a chance to gather like we used to. I made a list. We used to have the open meal, which was a service, but also a community building service. We used to go and feed the homeless, but we sat down and ate with them, and we haven't been able to do that. And there were parties with young people serving cocktail goodies and things like that. No, goodies, food. No, there was none of that. It was a family, and I just, that's an observation I want to make, because unless we can be one-on-one with other people, we aren't going to encourage anybody to make, hey, somebody turned me off. Okay, oh, the battery's going. And that's all, just the observations. Hopefully, we will be able to return to some of those activities that help to build community.
Hi there. So on the slide that you have up there, you have two things that pique my interest. One says that the CMA, the funds are based on the number of households, and the second one is the CMA goal. And if I remember your slide that you had up there, the second biggest nut that we had for this church was how much money we gave the diocese every quarter. My question is, when was the last time somebody from this church actually looked at the rolls and saw how many active members we have as opposed to what the number supposedly is? Because we look at our CMA giving and the number's still sitting up there, 225 people. That's probably close to how many active givers there are in this church. And if we're getting our tithing to the diocese based on a higher number, that's one of the reasons we're in the hole.
It's a great question. So I could say this, we're in the process of doing that as we speak. Looking at all the registered members in our, it's a parish soft, is a software database, and going through, starting just by saying, okay, who do we know has moved on, who's moved away, and then the next phase is getting a group of people to reach out and actually see who is planning to come back, find out what their status is.
So there's an easy way to do that. You have a spreadsheet that has all the members. You have a spreadsheet of who gave in 2022. You compare the two spreadsheets against each other, and the people that didn't give get a phone call and say, are you still a member of this church?
Yeah. Yep. We'll be doing that over the next few weeks. Unfortunately, one comment about that, though, is we can't just remove somebody. They have to tell us that they're no longer.
Yeah, but if you don't start the process, it's never going to
Yeah,
happen.
that's right.
So we're paying for people that may not even be in this community any longer. So you may have, and we're being overcharged. For CMA, for this lawsuit that's going on, because it's based on the members that we have, I mean, it's really important that you do a census on this, this church and its members. And I agree with Bob here.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of things. You know, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about first, and I agree with Karen, what she said, and we're all disappointed. There isn't probably anybody in this whole church that isn't. This problem has been going on for over 100 years. You've got pastors that knew about it, bishops that knew about it, cardinals that knew about it, and popes. This problem belongs to Rome. It doesn't belong here. This is a problem that Rome should be kicking in. And I don't know why nobody's going to say anything, and we're just agreeing that the bishop is telling us what to do and wants us to cough up more money. There's a lot of parishes that are going to shut down, and we're losing parishioners. We're not gaining. This church is falling apart. Not just this church, but the Catholic Church in the United States. They spend more money in Africa than they do here. And our membership is dwindling, and they're going to different denominations. We need to do something. They have to come back here. I think Rome has got to step up, and somebody's got to get in touch with the bishop, to talk to the cardinals, to take it back to Rome, that says we're going to lose churches. We're going to lose people. I just don't understand why that's not being done.
Other comments about the settlement? I don't want to.
Okay. We already discussed, another question was, I'd like to know if the diocese will contribute. We already mentioned that they will. And we have a parishioner online that says she loves databases and will help us if we need help sorting out
Great.
ParishSoft.
Cool.
The other thing about ParaSoft, though, too, is that, like Dan said, we cannot remove anybody from that unless they tell us. And I just want to say, we do have a staff, but as the years have gone on, multiple staff members have taken on multiple responsibilities, and to sit down and contact every single one of those people ourselves is difficult, and to share that information with others to take on that responsibility. So we are in the works. Please know that we do take ParishSoft very seriously and try to make sure that our numbers are what they are. Somebody on, oh, thank you. Somebody online says they totally agree with Karen. The diocese hired very priced lawyers to defend the diocese against the victims. Let's help the victims, not the diocesan lawyers. Another question, what is the percent of the diocesan cost regarding the settlement that goes to litigation defense, and what percentage will go to the victims?
I don't know that. It's a great question. We could, we'll add that to our list of questions to the diocese. Yep.
Dan, I'll be very quick in respect to your timeline.
Sure.
My question pertains to the assessment. You mentioned earlier that you said the assessment was roughly about 200. You mentioned earlier that you said, Dan, the assessment is roughly 200K. Is that for this fiscal year, or is that for next? That's for this current fiscal year?
Well, that's
I
a
know
one-time
it's
payment.
It's an estimate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is, does that include CMA?
No.
Okay. The second question is, can you tell us what that assessment was in prior years, maybe a year or two back?
You're talking about the CMA assessment?
No, the
bankruptcy
assessment related to the elephant in the room. Well,
There's never been. This is
Okay,
the
so
first and only.
so this 200K, just to be clear, relates to the elephant in the room, basically, right?
Exactly, yep, and
Okay.
it's a one-time.
Thank you. Last comment, if I may.
Sure.
Any way you can post those slides on the website? Old people like us have a hard time seeing,
I think we probably could. Let me,
Sorry, old
maybe,
people like me. I apologize.
yeah,
I think a better way would be if you would like the slides, email Dan, and he will be able to provide that information.
yeah.
This information up on the website,
Yeah, I'm not sure we'd want this on
I
our
think-
website. Yeah, but I'll give it around daniel.hofford@dor.org, HOFFORD. But talk to me afterwards. It's on the website.
it's on
in
the website
bulletin.
and bulletin.
Yep.
Jim has, I'm sorry, wait, two Jims, but this Jim has been waiting. Do you mind?
John Hurley.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that we have two major funds, the capital expenditures and the what you call the savings fund.
Right.
And I know that the diocese actually controls that fund to the extent that they don't allow us, without their permission, to take out more than 5 or 10% in a given year. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So I'm assuming the diocese would certainly give us permission to take more than that out to pay them money. Correct?
Yes, I mean, the reality is,
I can't imagine the
This is a-
diocese telling us we can't take more than 5% out to pay.
the assessment amount, as has been explained to us, is non-negotiable between parishes and the diocese. Using the formula that Dan described, and based on the final settlement that's negotiated between attorneys for the victims and the attorneys for the diocese, there'll be a number. And that number gets paid out of diocesan insurance diocesan assets and contributions from parishes. And you're right. I mean, to Dan's point, if a resolution is at whatever point a resolution is arrived at, the diocese can go in and remove the funds from our savings account, or our portion of that.
My other question was, although it was sort of asked already online, is of our assessment, would any of those funds be used to pay for the defense costs, attorneys? You said they'd be going to the victims.
Yes.
Any of those, but also, do you know for sure that that money also isn't going to be used to pay the diocese, some of the diocese defense costs?
I can't answer that question with any degree of certainty.
Okay.
It has been explained to us that it will all be used to go to the victims. Now, it may well be that some of the diocesan assets are what's being used to compensate their attorneys. But to Dan's point, I think that representatives from the diocese will be very busy over the summer going to parishes explaining exactly how this whole thing works.
Rob?
Each parish already got a bill for the legal. The settlement is not, that's separate. Correct, Dan? Then we pay
The bill we got is for
lawyers.
lawyers, yes.
Right, so it's separate, Jim.
So we also got a bill for their defense attorneys. And that's in addition to the assessment we're going to get? Does that sound
I
right?
don't know. Can we add this to the list of questions we have for the diocese
let's add
to
it.
get some more clarification on that? Like, John, I don't want to speak about exactly what the 55 million is going to. I mean,
And I just want to say this too. Putting out the assessment number really should not have been put out there, because it has not been settled yet by the court. The judge has not accepted it. I know Dan has shared with you a number, but that does not mean that is what the amount is. So please, I know it doesn't make any of us happy. Can I say, keep it to yourselves? This was not supposed to be given out already, because it's not settled. The judge has not accepted the terms. I doubt it'll go down, but, it could go up. So please, wherever your hearts are, it was not supposed to be revealed. Okay, at this point?
And if I could just speak to that for a minute, was a somewhat of a point of disagreement between myself and Rob and Dan. I felt, and one of the reasons why I'm the one talking about the settlement is that I can be the one excommunicated, I guess. But no, more seriously, I felt that it would be wrong to call the parish together to say we have a crisis and then say, oh, but we really can't tell you why we have a crisis, but we sure do. And so I felt that it was important, even though it was somewhat speculative, well, not somewhat, it was speculative and only an estimate, with a settlement still to come. And I'm not trying to make myself a hero out of this thing. I felt it was incredibly important. We as a finance ministry and with Rob's leadership have tried for 5 years to be as transparent and honest and open as we could be about the financial situation in the parish. And I felt to do something that would impinge the integrity of what we have spent so much time doing would just plain be wrong. And if the bishop doesn't like it, I'm really sorry about that. If his staff doesn't like it, I'm very sorry about that. But I think that we as a parish need to be able to make decisions about how we're going to move forward as a parish. And I just felt that we needed to have some benchmark against which we could plan for our future.
John, real quick, I know we talked about 20 minutes for this discussion, so we could move on to the other one, but I do want to respond to... Yep, and I do want to make a quick response to you as well.
Well, I'm going to be a good segue for you because to me, I mean, I listened to this and it's unsavory, it's distasteful. Nobody in here likes what we've just been talking about, or the fact that we are going to get charged this, whether we want to be or not. That's what I think. I think we're going to get charged. And I think what's going to happen is diocese is just going to take the money out of our $200,000. They're going to take it. And I will say this, as a parish, we're freaking lucky we got $200,000 they could take, because if we didn't, I don't know what we'd do. So the bigger question is really, if we still had that $200,000, we could fritter it away over the next 3 years by running deficits. What we really need to do is, we need to get that behind us, and it's going to get behind us because the diocese is going to take it. And we got to figure out what we're going to do so that we're not running $75,000 deficits going forward.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of choices. You either get more collection or you spend less. I mean,
Thank you. You can pick up your check on your way out for that was wonderful. We were perilously close to being a couple of minutes over 20 minutes, and that was a great segue to what really is important, and it has been mentioned in a couple of other places. I mean, the reality is, even if the settlement issue wasn't going on, Dan, I think, has presented us with the real challenge we have, which is that we need to figure out a path forward, both short-term and long-term. And my hope coming out of the discussion for the next whatever period of time is that at the end we are able to agree on a path forward, not a solution, but that we're going to create a path forward with either task forces or subcommittees or whatever the heck we want to call them, that will, see you later, that will focus on how we can continue as a thriving faith community.
We do have
Question about the cardinals in Rome, we'll add that to the list. Didn't mean to not respond, but...
Yes, there's multiple people online also asked if we were going to finish that address, and I think for time's sake, it'll be another time.
Yeah, I don't know what else to
going
say,
ahead.
but except
Okay.
that we can do that.
We have
that's what I
two
said.
additional questions regarding our own parish. Someone at home asked, do we work broker for our energy? They can help us find the best supply rates and save money, and whoever this person at home is has a contact.
Not that I'm aware of, but shoot me an email.
Okay. And are we allowed to apply for private foundation grants, or does the diocese have to review things like that?
It's a good question. I'd have to look into that as well. I guess that my first question would be, it depends on what for. You know, program versus building versus general operating.
I have not gotten any more texts that we have any more questions from home. Are there any other questions in regards to parish items?
No, after all the dust is settled, I think we would expect the diocese to give us a full report on exactly how this whole thing was resolved, where the money came from, insurance, the parishes, and the diocese, and also some accountability for what monies the diocese did pay as far as sale of properties or anything else they did. We should demand that of them, so just thought I'd say that for the record.
We can do that. Any other questions about the church operations, though?
Just on, I realize we have cut our staffing to the bone. We, share staff. We used to have volunteers, that we share staff with Transfiguration as it is now. So usually an operating budget, one of your biggest expenses is your staff. And if we only have 4 or 5 people, is it based on the amount of time that they work for St. Catherine's versus the Transfig? How does that operation split happen with the shared staff?
Yeah, it's Rob, Laura, who's part-time, and myself full-time are split with Transfiguration. Yeah, Rob's 50-50. Laura and I are 60-40, but that I'm looking at that as well. I'm tracking, my time and Laura's time, and that may change.
If I'm remembering one of those graphs that you had up, the one with contributions and total revenue and expenses, it looked like things were tracking pretty well, and then in the last 2 years, revenue came down and expenses went up. Did I see that right?
Correct.
Why did expenses go up?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic, right? Because look at this green line is our expenses. It's not a straight line. I mean, it dipped, and then it's just coming back up from the low. Because A, things are getting more expensive, yeah, and B, we're doing more, right? We, at this time, there wasn't much happening. Everything was closed. I imagine the thermostat was turned way low. I don't think there was any funerals happening. There was not much in terms of programming, at least here online, right? So
we just returned to normal.
It's returning to normal.
Returning to normal from an operating standpoint.
Exactly.
Do you know what the source is, the $200,000 that we do have in savings? Where did that come from? Can we get some more?
There was a capital campaign. There's been money that's been set aside. I don't know specifically.
Bob, I think you can speak to the.
You need the microphone.
I gave mine away. The capital campaign, that was a $700,000 at the time, and a lot of it got spent for the reasons we had it. But what's left of the capital campaign is restricted funds, as Dan explained. It's held for any capital expenses that come up. We blow a furnace or HVAC unit or whatever, that pays for that. Last year, 2 years ago, we put a roof on the community center, $65,000 by the time we were done. That came out of capital. The savings came over the years. I mean, I've been involved with the finance committee, 20-some years. And as we grew years ago, we had years where we ended up with surplus budget, $20,000, $30,000. We started putting that in savings. And 6, 7 years ago, we finally got involved with the Communis Fund and invested the bulk of that, which over the years, up until a couple of years ago, we've got very good returns on. Things we spent, we never touched principal. It was earnings. And we did the same thing with the capital fund, so that we had good returns on it up until a year and a half ago. Why does the diocese control that money?
My question is, if it was surpluses that were generated by this parish, why is it now controlled by the diocese? Why don't we control it?
I understand. They don't actually control it, but they have access to it. Okay. But they're not controlling what we spend it on per se. If we have a major capital project, we do have to run it by them. They have certain limits on the capital.
Communis is separated, is a separate entity. It's its own investment firm.
Right.
And we
Communis
just
is-
collectively, I imagine it saves cost if we all work with the same, as opposed to each of us going to a different investment broker. And we have done very well with it, yeah, over the years.
We do have another question from a viewer at home. If we are unable to arrive at a long-term plan, is it possible that we will need to fold to one physical structure and one staff with Transfiguration?
Yes, because anything is possible.
It's possible.
I mean, I don't mean to be rude about it, but it's unlikely, but it would be silly to say that. Well, let me take a step back 2 years, and I'm the attorney for the diocese. The parishes will never have to contribute to a settlement for the bankruptcy. We see where that went. It would be foolish of us to make a statement that says that will never happen. I think that our charge is to creatively find the way that, like so many clusters of parishes, we find a way to be uniquely St. Catherine's in Mendon as a part of a parish community that currently includes Transfiguration and in the future may include more, but that we are a space that is different in the way that we make St. Catherine's a different place to come together as community.
So, Dan, it's probably a question more for you. First of all, we did receive the PPP money. How much was that?
73,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. So my other question is, you're familiar with the ERTC money. Is there any chance of us applying for that?
My understanding is we cannot apply for that.
And why is that? Do you know why?
Diocese told us we couldn't, and I left it at that, to be honest. I think at one point the law was you couldn't if you had already gotten the PPP. That may have changed.
That is not true.
But
that is not true.
I mean,
believe me, I'm going crazy these days with the ERTC monies. But I was in my business. But you cannot use the same quarters that you used for the PPP money.
Let's connect. I'd love to talk more about it with you. And if you could help out with
that
navigating that, I would love that.
That could end up some money. Who knows?
Sure.
I mean, if you got 73 with the PPP money,
I can share what I know about it, which is what they told me,
okay.
and we can go from there. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
John?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one point from earlier on the Communis Fund. There was a concern about the diocese controls that fund. They didn't force us to put the money there. That was a conscious decision by the Finance Council several years ago. It was just considered to be a very attractive place to put the money, right? We had money tied up in bank accounts that years back paid good interest. And when it started paying really anything, we were looking for a good place to put the money. And we weren't actually seeking out a diocese fund. It just happened that it's a good fund. And so that was the decision that was made a number of years ago. So, it could have been any other fund as well. We just decided that looked like an attractive option at the time. And actually, it's made quite a bit of money over the years.
And I think the point also that needs to be recognized is whether the money that we have is in a communis fund or in the Cayman Islands or in whatever else, our assessment would be the same because it's based on the formula that Dan described. And so we would have to, one way or another, be able to contribute those funds. And just a point that was made a couple minutes ago about the capital fund. I don't know if those of you who read the Catholic Courier, I would encourage you since we pay for it. There was an article a couple of weeks ago about St. Christopher's in Chilai, who, because they didn't have a capital fund and desperately needed a new roof, had to go to the diocese to figure out how they were going to be able to repair the roof on their worship space. Thanks to, in great measure, Bob Goldbach, but many others over the years, we have been able to be very, very prudent in the use of our capital fund to maintain a self and well-maintained church and other facilities. I think we need to be careful about how we look at the use of those funds as we move forward. Personal opinion.
A viewer from home said, yes, you can apply for both, and asked if we have external auditors, and if so, could we engage them to assist? I have no idea what that means.
The
Yeah.
ERTC.
The ERTC.
Yeah, and you can, yes, you can apply for the ERTC even though you received the PPP money. Cannot use the same quarters, and why would we pay an outside auditor to do that? We don't need to. They're not, auditors are not cheap. And we're trying to get money in, not.
I think the question was, do we have auditors?
We do,
Yeah.
Bonadio.
Oh, Bonadio, okay.
Right. Then
I'm
they
just
should have
relaying.
suggested it.
Anything
Going once?
else?
Do you have something?
Just real quickly,
Yep.
if you look at the charts, and I just noticed, spent a lot of time looking at this one, the biggest problem we have is obviously revenue's going down. And the reason revenue's going down is because the number of parishioners is going down. Now, the elephant in the room is not going to help that situation at all because of the emotional aspect of it. But are we looking at any way to, you talked about putting some committees together and task force and so forth, to look at how do we try to grow parishioners in order to get the lines back up? Just a thought.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
No, I was just making a comment about are we looking at, how do we grow parishioners?
Right. Absolutely.
I'm an ex-marketing guy, so I think more about,
Sure. Yep.
One of the things that we talked about earlier was the fact that we have a list of parishioners, but we don't know who is active. I have two questions. Do we have, or can we create a task force? It sounds like the staff is a little overwhelmed to do this, and to go through and glean who are, or call, whatever you want to say, find out, give a personal phone call to the people that are not active, have not contributed, and ask them why they're not coming, to answer Bob's question, and find out what we can do to make changes, as a community. They may have a good idea. I think it sounds like the staff doesn't have the time to do that, but that might be something that we can do, because I think the red line is very obvious up there, that there are people who knows? Maybe people have died from COVID and we don't know. I don't know. So I think we need to.
No, it's a
make
great
sure-
idea, and we would
need to
love
get
we
a
would
group
love
together.
volunteers to do that. Does this mean you're you
That's
volunteering?
I thought about that before I took
Okay,
before I took the
email me
microphone.
your interest in doing that. We're like I said, we started the process by looking at the data, doing some of that, and then probably within a week or two, maybe sooner, we could get, we could start making phone calls.
I was just going to say, there was somebody that, from the back that was saying that they're good with spreadsheets, and they can very easily look at the spreadsheets and know very quickly who needs a phone call. I can make phone calls. So
That's what we need.
and
We need people to make the phone calls.
We need a team to do that,
Yep.
and we'll put them together.
Great.
It's kind of like the customer analogy that Bob said, right? Let's go grow new customers. Well, we have customers, they just are not participating. They are not participating financially, they're not participating maybe by coming to Mass. Maybe they're not participating in ways that we want and need them to. So those are easier customers for us to snag and bring in the door than someone who's completely outside that circle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love for us to focus on that. The elephant in the room, I totally agree. It all stinks. But it is what it is, and it's going to pass, and it's going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as a community, we need to focus on growing the talent that we have within. So,
Dan, if I could make a point before, because that's a great point. Several years ago, when I was a member of St. Thomas More Parish, probably 25 years ago now that I think about it, in an effort to evangelize, we did a census and took the list that Dan and Karen have talked about of everyone who's on the rolls, and there were probably 75 people, if I'm not mistaken, who went out and actually knocked on doors. Probably something you wouldn't do in 2023, but nonetheless, and left a brochure that said, "We miss you, and you're welcome back," or I forget exactly what it said, but it was a very concerted effort to demonstrate to folks who were registered with the parish that we were concerned that we hadn't seen them. Just another idea to Bob's point and others that, how do we reach out to folks who we haven't seen in a while?
We have two more questions from our viewers at home. One is, what is considered inactive or active, registered, unregistered, in terms of Airsoft? The other one is, who owns the church building? For everyone who is listening at home, no one has a microphone here. They all said the diocese.
Well, it's maybe a gray area. Technically, we are our own 501c3. We're our own corporation. But if I'm saying this correctly, some of the legal members of that are the bishop and the chancellor, maybe. So, yes, technically we own it, but, at the end of the day, yeah, the diocese has a hand in it for sure. Let's put it that way. As far as the active versus inactive, Karen, maybe I'll let you speak.
I don't know that. I can look into it.
In terms of ParishSoft, yeah. So
ParishSoft is our program that has all of our parishioners registered, and also those that are unregistered. We can't delete anybody from the system. So if you are put in the system at some point in the last however many years we've had this program, you are in that. And there's check marks for active, inactive, and registered or unregistered. And you can, if you go to another parish and you are registered with St. Catherine's, or let me do this way. If somebody from another parish is registered and comes to St. Catherine's because we are so awesome, we can take their information and register them here and mark them as parishioners here. I don't know what constitutes as active or inactive. In
Active would be one, participating in programs. Sacramento, thank you. Active would be, I mean, let's be realistic here, would be people who are involved in the Sacramento programs. That makes them active. Attending, and yes, hello, contributing to the life of the parish financially. They are doing stewardship, time, talent, and treasure. That's it. Inactive are people who are dead on the radar. I mean, let's be honest. You know, inactive is like, haven't seen them in years. They haven't given in years. That's inactive. There
I
you
didn't
go.
know if there was
Let's
a
be realistic.
if there was.
Well, and not only that, Rob.
You cannot take them off, as you heard earlier, as Karen said. That has to be their decision. We cannot do that, even though they're not around.
But to Rob's other point, there are people who we see every week. There are people who we see every week who have a pulse, who can't seem to write a check.
True.
That's a whole separate category of active but.
True. Yeah.
So John, what I would suggest is what I suggested before. You take the list of the members, who's made a financial contribution. You contact them. You ask them a question. Are you still a member of St. Catherine's? If they answer yes, you say, well, we noticed you haven't given any money in the past 24
See, that's
months or
no, you
whatever.
can't do that.
You can't. Well,
that
but
is personal, private matters,
right.
Bob.
But here's the other
You're
thing.
not privy to that.
Here's the other thing, Bob. And to other folks that's an important criteria that you need to think about. Because Rob and I have had this conversation in the past as well. If we were to purge the parish rolls of all of the inactive parishioners, we could conceivably get to a point where the diocese could say, well, gosh, there's only a couple hundred people in that church. Why are we continuing to support it? Let's just merge them with somebody else and get on with business. So it's a little bit of a delicate dance that we have to do from the point of view of data integrity. I understand what you're saying, and Dan and I have had the same conversation. On the other hand, it's really, as I say, a delicate situation, because we don't want to be in a situation where essentially we put ourselves out of business by being a little bit too honest. I think that the again, personal opinion, I think we're better following the path that Bob and others have mentioned of saying, how do we go out to those people, find out what they really are thinking about, and see as a parish community, how can we address what seems to be keeping people away?
Yeah, John, I'll just reiterate that again. That I've spoken to a few other finance directors in the diocese about this, and they've all said the same thing. And I agree with this. Do it. We're going to do it. The more help we get, the quicker it'll go. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a small amount in terms of how it affects our finances. And the key is what we've been saying here, re-engaging folks. And not just because we need more money. Yes, we do. But we want people to be part of the community. And we have to lead with that.
For the people who are actively attending and contributing, have you discussed an amount that maybe you can go to those people and say, if you gave us 10% more a week, 15% more a week, what is it that to stop the bleed that we need now that we can start and start getting money in the coffers?
Microphone.
I think at our meeting that we had in January 31st, we thought it was like if everybody could do like another 10%. It came out to Dan, I think you said.
Yeah, I think we had said that. Yeah, I could run some more calculations to get a more tight number. You know, within the week we could have that.
Which in the scheme of things is, if we can, I don't know how you even put it out there to the parishioners, but that's a small amount of money in the scheme of things if it will keep us with operating funds.
And we could do it a few scenarios, right? Let's say there's 300 regular givers. So we could say, well, if all 300 people that regularly gave an extra X percent, and then we could say, or we could say, for the remainder who don't give but are considered registered, if they gave X amount, right? We could run a few different scenarios. That's doable.
But let me also just point out something Dad mentioned. It's now February 15th. We're projecting a $70,000 deficit for the end of June. The monthly projection is $44,000 a month. If that increases 10% over the next 5 months, that cuts the deficit maybe in half. I'm not saying we don't ask for 10%. If I'm sitting in the pews, which I don't have to because I'm in the choir, so I'm spared that agony. But what I want to know is, am I giving 10% more to a sinking ship, or is there a plan? Because for 5 years we've been asking for more, and it doesn't seem to have fixed things. And I don't mean to be contrary. I'm just, again, in an effort to be as transparent as possible, I think that if we're going to ask for more money from folks who have already given, because let's face it, the people who are going to give 10% more aren't the people who haven't given anything. It's the folks here and others who already probably give to the extent that they can. 10% may not be more to some folks, but to others, it's a soccer camp, or it's gymnastics, or it's paying for faith formation, or whatever. For other folks, it's to Rob's point, it's one less Starbucks a week.
Coming back.
I think we just owe folks a sense of the path forward before we ask for more.
John, I agree with you, and I think we've been talking about a multi-pronged approach here this evening. One of those things is to get us past this deficit. I'm just guessing that the approach to that should probably not be percentage-based, but should probably be based on our sense of what it's going to take to get us there with the current volume of givers, with the current folks who are giving now. But I also think that moving ahead, and I know we'll talk more about this in our task forces and council, but I think we've got to be able to each year show our parishioners what our operations are going to cost us and what it's going to take us to get the 10% excess that we've talked about, or 15% excess, so we can build that communist fund back again, or build our savings back. Nonprofits are never nonprofits. They can't be, because if you're not budgeting for an excess, you're budgeting for failure. And I know that's really dollars and cents oriented, and it doesn't take a lot of our mission into consideration. Yeah. But I think I said in another meeting, I worked for a Catholic hospital one time, and the CEO of that hospital was a nun. And Sister Ursula always said to us, and to everyone who was involved in that hospital, no margin, no mission. So I think we have to understand, and I think people do understand that. I'm hearing that tonight. We are, in many ways, the trustees, the unofficial trustees of this church, of St. Catherine's. The people who are here tonight are here because they believe in this church, and they believe in our mission, and they believe in the spiritual aspects of our lives and the strength of that. And I think we have an obligation as a group to continue to go further with that trustee mission. I operated nonprofits for years, and we were always able to go to folks who could go to other folks. And I understand, Rob, about the confidentiality of the giving and what we can't know. But we do know people, all of us know people who give and who may not be active anymore. And that may be part of our operation, part of our future here, having us go out to people, and not the staff, because our staff have their own talents, and they also are worked to the bone, you know, and I think we have to keep that in mind as well. So I'll stop at that, but I think there's so much that can occur here on a multi-pronged level that we have to keep in mind, and there's no one easy solution.
Leo, to your point, I think this is really, thank you for hitting on it. We like to say the church is not the building, it's the people inside it. So if we're going to continue with the Church of St. Catherine's, then it's not a staff, as I said before, it's not a liturgy issue, it's not a faith issue, it's not a fault issue, it's not a staff issue, and it's not a Rob issue. It's an us issue. We are the church. And if we, if we want the church to survive, then we need to be the ones who make it happen, supported by staff, encouraged prayerfully by Rob, but we're the ones who have to figure out how are we going to make it happen in the short term so that we can have a long term. And I think that that's part of where we want to go from here, is to have a commitment from the people here and online and those who couldn't attend to say, we're committed to make this happen. It's going to be painful, and some things we don't like to have happen may have to happen, but we're committed to our church to make it happen.
I hate to ask a minor question, John, but last summer you asked everybody to give 5% more. What was the result of that? Just so I have that in my mind, how that worked or didn't work.
Bill, I'll tell you, part of the difficulty with that is that establishing the baseline of where we were coming out of COVID and whatnot has been frustratingly difficult to assess. The summer of 2022, our collection revenues were less than the summer before. I don't recall the percentage off the top of my head. And folks would say, well, it's the summer. And I would think, well, it was the summer before, too. In the fall, revenues picked up. The other thing that's been really a challenge for Dan and the finance ministry is, well, one thing in particular is that a lot more people, those with gray hair, are now giving once a year instead of 52 times or 12 times. And they give at the end of the year because of end-of-year distributions and all sorts of other tax considerations. That's really skewed our ability to figure out where we are from month to month because of one of the reasons Dan is projecting lower revenue in the second half of the year is because we got a lot of stuff in the first half of the year. And the other that's just been an issue is that some of our very, very generous parishioners over the years have either, unfortunately, passed away or have had to move away from the parish. And so we have lost their friendship and their contributions both personally and financially. Long answer to a simple question that hopefully didn't seem too convoluted. It was really hard. We didn't have a good baseline, unfortunately.
There's one more, well, two more. There are two more comments from YouTube. We can't be the first. What have other parishes that have faced similar challenges have done? So do we have an idea of who other parishes we might be able to reach out to? That was one of the questions. And the other one is, has the Finance Committee developed or brainstormed ways to increase revenue other than getting more parishioners or donations, such as leasing agreements, rental use opportunities of church assets, such as the community center?
So the first one, what have other churches done? Well, right now, if we're talking about in relation to the settlement, they're doing exactly what we're doing right now. We're having these hard conversations, and I know of one church that mortgaged their building. A lot of churches have savings. A lot of them this is really going to affect, and I honestly don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, if there are some churches that close their doors because of the settlement.
Well, our cousin belongs to a parish, I'm not going to mention the name, but at Mass last week, they actually came up with an amount of money based on their parishioners and asked that they consider that amount of money per family.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a good idea instead of this percentage thing, that we try to come up with an amount of money that's going to get us out of that deficit, an amount of money per family. And
We certainly can consider that, absolutely. Yeah.
try to come up with that figure. That's what
Yeah,
they did
and I think
last Sunday at his Mass.
Presenting it probably from a few different perspectives.
Whether it was for operating deficit or the elephant in the room, I don't know, but that's what they did.
And to answer that question, let's go back 5 years, 10 years. Churches have clustered. My parents live on the west side. Blanking the name of the parish now. It's St. Jude's. Holy Family, thank you. But it used to be St. Jude's, St. Helens, and Holy Ghost. And now there's one building left, if you will. It's still Holy Family, but all three came together. They all meet at St. Jude's. The other buildings were sold off. So they now can say they're in a pretty good financial position. I mean, that's what some churches have done. There's others that, I know the ones in Brighton, they clustered 10 years ago. They came together as one corporation, but they still have two separate churches with two unique communities. And I personally think that is a very good option for us, where we can, as John said, maintain two unique communities, but we merge the business side of it. But those are all things we'll look at.
The other thing, Karen, in answer to the second part of the question was, and Bob, you have more knowledge than I do about this. At one time, there was a daycare center that was operating out of the community center. There are some challenges with doing that, both legal and operationally, especially with the schnacky players taking up space for 6 weeks a year, saying, and faith formations. But it doesn't mean it can't be considered. Yes, we have used the community center as a revenue source in the past.
Yeah, I don't know of any church, Catholic or otherwise, that doesn't ask this same question. The problem is churches are not real estate developers. And renting out facilities, it's a lot of work. It's a lot more than it usually yields. And we're literally having a conversation right now about pinpointing, when some of you maybe have called up and go, hey, can we use the center for this party or that party? How much do we charge? These are parishioners, are they not parishioners? Who's going to be there to staff it? This is a weekend, and I don't want to be here. It's you know, I mean, it's you got to have somebody here though to do that. Oh, Bob, can you come on? That's not fair to Bob. So these are the considerations that we have to look at. I think if we were to say something like, okay, you know, let's take that entire wing and find a charter school or whatever, a private school, and rent the whole thing out and generate $3,000-$4,000 a month in profit. Okay, maybe now you're talking, but is that really the direction we want to go? And then where do we do all our own programming? So it's a great question, but I'll be honest, my personal opinion with trying to rent out space, it's not going to get us out of this situation.
Talking about renting out that building is antiquated, people. The bathrooms are horrible. Right. You're not going to be renting it out to people who are just coming and saying, wow, this is like a fabulous space. That's why their preschool moved out, because it was so antiquated. The bathrooms needed multi-thousands of dollars of reinvestment. So you say you rent it, just putting it out there. We have to invest then to change it around, to make it feasible if you think you're going to rent that space out. It is not pretty. If any of you have been in there recently. Okay, it is not.
Yeah. And then we get into all sorts of
great space.
liability
so got to be realistic there too. Okay?
Liability issues and insurance issues.
Comment was made, excuse me, comment was made about the Schnacky players up there for 6 weeks or so. I don't know how many people realize the Schnack. I put new batteries in all these too. Let's try this one. The Schnacky players are a revenue generator for us. Everything, all the profits that they generate are donated directly to the parish. On the average, they've been going $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year donation. So for the inconvenience of the 4, 5, 6 weeks that they're up there, they pay us back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when you mentioned that, John, it was just in the context of, you know, these are the considerations. But yeah, if you see them, if you know them, give them a big hug, a big sign, a lot of gratitude. And if you guys are listening, thank you. Did an awesome job, and we appreciate you.
And I want to say, in terms of inconvenience, it really isn't, because we work together with our schedules to make sure that everyone has their space and that we are attuned to creating a safe environment, that people are not where they're not supposed to be at times when we have our faith formation programming and confirmation sessions. So it's not that our ministry and faith formation cannot exist for that 6 weeks. That is not what that inconvenience was about. Yeah. I just want to put that out there so everyone knows that we work together, and the programming and the mission of our parish is to be fulfilled spiritually and entertainment.
Want to do a quick time check. It's 5 minutes to 9. I think we had committed to 7 to 9. I don't want to keep people beyond that. Is there, I'm not even sure how to ask this question, so just bear with me as I try to freeform it here. I don't think it's fair to you who have spent 2 hours of your life that you won't get back, if you leave without having any sense of where we're going from here. Sort of like, well, that was an interesting time. It was like a bad movie, but sometimes you buy a ticket that you regret. I think it's really important that we have some sense of what the path forward is. What Dan put up in a slide that showed literally a path forward was a point that we have a group of people not just finance ministry, not just parish council, but perhaps with that leadership and everyone in this room and beyond it, a part of contributing to both a short-term as well as the long-term discussion, because they really are two different conversations in that regard. Obviously, there's no long-term unless there's a successful short-term, but is there a consensus that that's a path forward that we want to pursue? Good. Now we can go.
Yes.
Now we can go home. Thank you. That really is important. We've captured, we're like the Chinese. We got pictures of you as you came in, so we know who was here. So
Hold on, wait.
I got one more thing too. This is the letter from the bishop regarding parishes contributing to the settlement. It was sent out to everybody, but if you didn't see it, didn't get a copy, here's a copy. Please read it. We can get more if we need. My understanding was the diocese sent it out to everybody.
No.
Okay. Here's copies. If you want one, email me. I'll get it to you. Yeah.
Hey, John, just one more thing. I want to say on behalf of everybody here, I think I can speak for them. We appreciate what you did tonight. We appreciate your transparency. We appreciate your timing. It's so, I think it's very good that you disclose this to us at this point and not later towards the end of the fiscal year. And to go a step further, what you said, John, this is our home. This is our second family. Let us help you tackle these problems. So please, you talked about task force and step forward. Please let us participate and do whatever we can to help sustain this parish. I don't think anybody here wants this parish to close. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. So following Bob Goldbach's suggestion at the end of the joint meeting, I would suggest that we all, pardon me, I've been talking way too much, that we all stand and offer in our Father and thanksgiving for each other.
Hold hands. Are we holding hands? Can we hold hands? Our in heaven.
Before anyone leaves, if you are willing to help make phone calls and help with spreadsheets and all of that, either email me if you're watching still, or come up and let me know.